Okay.
Today we are interviewing legendary comic book writer Stephen Grant. He's worked for Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, Boom, IDW, First. I think you worked for every Image, every company ever made, basically, right?
Pardon?
You've worked for every comic book company, basically, that's been in existence?
Yeah, well, I'd say probably the last 30, 40 years, probably at least half of them.
And some very memorable stuff. I have a lot of your comic books in my collection. And how this usually works is it's something strikes a chord with me, and I'm like, oh, I'd really love to have this creator on the show. For you, there's a couple of things that got us to here. We interviewed Howard Chaykin a couple months back, and he mentioned you because you took over American Flag for him, and he spoke very highly of you.
Well, that's nice of him.
Yeah, and it's one of our favorite interviews because I'm assuming you know Howard fairly well.
Oh, I know Howard pretty well, yeah.
So we reach out to him like I reached out to you, and we say, Howard, we'd love you being on the show, and he says yes. He comes on the show, and the first thing he says to us when we get on is, "Who the fuck are you, and why am I on this show?" And we're like, "Oh, this is not going to be fun." And then he has a connection. That sounds like Howard, right?
Well, the first time I met Howard was at I think a science fiction convention, like 1963. And he's just basically, as soon as we started talking, I forget exactly how we started talking, but he started it out by smart-mouthing me. And I just smart-mouthed him back, and that was pretty much, it's the start of our friendship.
So it's just basically you have to win him over, right?
I don't think he was that used to people just kind of smart-mouthing him back. So,
That's good. So how did you first get into the comic book industry? What brought you into comic books?
Oh, well, I if you want the deep dive, it was...
love the deep dive.
It was, I forget which one, but it was one of the 3 major childhood diseases. I think it was probably chickenpox. Because this is back in 1961 when televisions were like still, huge. And you couldn't move them from room to room. They were real. And I was stuck in my bed in my bedroom, and the television was out there, and I was bored to tears, and my father thought, well, I'll buy him a comic book to get him, just for him to have something to do. So he bought me a copy of, I think it was All-Star West. It was the third to last issue of All-Star West, and it was the only one I ever saw when I was a kid. And so I was reading this thing, and I guess like every other kid at the time, I was supposed to be into Westerns. And my parents remember me being much more into Westerns than I remember being. But I got to a page in it, an ad page, house ad from DC, which was this full page ad. And it started this big arrow at the top, and it zooms down to the bottom, and the arrow reads at the top, just imagine, in big letters. And then it goes the laundry list down the arrow of Superman, Batman, The Flash, Green Lantern, Wonder Woman, etc., all together in one comic magazine. The Justice, and down at the bottom, the logo for the Justice League of America. And over here, there's a picture of, I think it was issue 5. It was when Gravity went wild. And, and I'm 7 years old at the time, and I'm going, I have never heard of any of this stuff before, but it's like, and that was my reaction is, what is this? I have never seen anything like this before. So I spent the week just desperate to get out to lying in bed, just desperate to get out to the store and buy that issue. And by the time I got there, a week later, the next issue was out, so I never did buy that one on the stands. I eventually had it as a collector later on. But I got the next issue of it, and then I got after that, that got me interested in comics, and then The next one that I got was the Flash 123, which a lot of people may remember.
Oh, I remember.
And that was kind of pivotal for me as well. And then eventually it just, I just started buying comics and just loved comics. That's all. So, and that's what started me in the deep dive. And then eventually, like most kids reading comics, you start thinking of, stories. You want to store your own stories and your own characters and stuff. And I started thinking of that. And then, I just basically read every comic I could read. I read lots of other things too. I wasn't simply reading comics, but I read, every comic I could get my hand on. It really hands on it. Didn't really matter what the content was. One thing led to another is what it amounts to. And by the time I actually got into comics, I was no longer interested in getting into comics. So. Because a lot had gone through. I mean, underground comics had come in a big way, and that had kind of skewed my my view of the sorts of things that I'd want to do. And I, in fact, started out trying to do underground comic with Kitchen Sink right at the time when underground comics went under, because there was a prosecution. A court case they went to the Supreme Court about whether they were pornography or not, right. The comics themselves were not affected, but this was standards of pornography, what constituted pornography. And at that point, the Supreme Court decided that local standards determined pornography, so every community could have its own local standards. And what this meant for underground comics, when a lot of them were, if you've ever read Robert Crumb or anything like that, a lot of them are pretty out there. And what this meant is that every underground comics publisher was now suddenly facing 3,000 local lawsuits from lots of, because there were a lot of district attorneys out there who were willing to make perfectly willing to make a political name for themselves by defending children against filthy comic books. And so that kind of put underground comics out of business, and that was kind of the end of that. And then I did college, and by the time I got out of college, I was writing film and music criticism and doing other things, and wasn't really that interested in writing comics anymore, although I'd been in I kept my hand in fandom and was writing for fanzines like this thing out of Indiana called CPL, which I forget what it meant. It stood for something mildly obnoxious, like
don't you miss those fanzines? There were so many of them.
I loved them. I still got them. I've got most of them. I've got a box full of them. Yeah, I loved 70s comics fanzines. This is when people started getting intellectual about comics, started thinking about comics.
Well, college kids got into it, right? And the college kids started really dissecting.
Well, but also, there had been one of the big influences on my life in terms of my view of comics was the if you remember Roy Thomas's Alter Ego magazine.
Yeah.
The Gil Kane interview in that was just suddenly, it's like, wow, this is like a whole different way to think about comic books.
And you worked with Gil Kane too at one point.
Eventually, Gil was always my favorite artist. That was the thing. It's starting with Green Lantern #9. I ran across that, and that was another. Back then there were all these things that where you'd get issues of comics and you'd go, oh my God, what is this? And it's like, just weird things. And in Green Lantern #9, they introduced the Green Lanterns of the universe, which is a concept I've never actually cared that much for. But back then, they popped up very, very infrequently. And this was the first meeting of the first official meeting of all the Green Lanterns of the universe. So you got to this one page that had like all these weird creatures as Green Lanterns, and it's like, that's one of those pages like, oh my God, what is this? It's like, and I just always loved Gil's work before I even knew his name.
Right.
As a matter of fact, it turns out that the All-Star comics that my father bought me was drawn by Gil Kane. So, it goes way back to the beginning. And I think that was probably my big formative influence. So anyway, I got to that, and suddenly it was like this whole different way to think about comics. Whether you agree with them or not, it was, it was a bit more sophisticated than I was used to that point. And So then but I was, writing for fanzines, and I was working for this. I was writing for one called CPL, which happened to be published by a guy named Bob Layton and edited by a guy named Roger Stern.
Oh, okay.
And I had also tried putting together some projects with fan projects with a couple people, including this guy from someplace up in Canada named John Byrne. So
Oh, really? That guy?
I was kind of in that mix. And Roger eventually, now Bob moved to Connecticut to work with Dick Giordano. Roger eventually moved to New York to become a assistant editor at Marvel. And I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, was living there and was trying to figure out a way out of Madison, Wisconsin. And so every so often I would go to New York and crash with Roger. And in Easter of 1978, my girlfriend at the time was going there to interview with Juilliard for a week. So I went in with her and I crashed with Roger, but I called him up and said, I'm coming in, and is it okay if I crash with you? And he said, yeah. And he said, when are you coming in? I said, I'll be in on Sunday night. He said, okay, be ready to write an issue of Marvel 2-in-1 on Monday morning.
That's the first thing you wrote, is that Marvel 2-in-1?
Yeah.
This one?
That one, yes, that one. And I just, at the time, I thought, okay, well, this is going, because he and I had long discussions in the past about how I was probably not the right mindset to write Marvel comics, and I kind of felt that way too at the time. And so I thought, what the hell is this? And it turned out that he had just taken over the editorship of that. And as he put it, and which I don't believe is true, but this is how he put it, it was 18 months behind schedule. So he just wanted stories to go in there. That was it. So he said, pick a character and write it, come up with a story. And so I got in there and I thought, well, this is a lark. I'm gonna do this for a lark. What the hell? And I thought, I know what I'll do. I'll do a story guest starring Moon Knight and narrated in the first person by him.
Okay.
Because because Doug Manch had completely independently of me come up with the secret identity of Stephen Grant for Moon Knight.
So it's not you. It's not based on you.
Not me. As the story that I got, and I've never verified this with Doug, but I've no reason to disbelieve it at the moment, is that Moon Knight, all the identities of Moon Knight were Doug's college roommates.
Okay.
So they were all three of them were Doug's college roommates. So he just used those names. Like I say, whether that's true or not, you'd have to ask Doug, but that was the story I got. But it had absolutely nothing to do with me, just as when Steve Gerber gave Captain America, Steve Rogers, the middle name of Grant, that also had nothing to do with me. That was also a childhood friend of Steve's in St. Louis, who was also a big comic book fan. And as a matter of fact, if you go through old DC letter pages, you can find letters from him in it. And letters from me, so don't get them confused. But anyway, so I sat down. So I got in on Sunday night, very late Sunday night, and Roger and I went into the Marvel offices at like 8 o'clock on Monday morning, which is much earlier than I was used to getting up to. And I sat down at a typewriter and I typed, spent like an hour typing out a 5-page plot, handed it to him. He read through it, wrote a bunch of notes, handed it back to me, and I retyped the thing to fit his notes, and I handed it back to him, and he read it through, and then he handed me a voucher, and I filled out the voucher, and he took it, and that was kind of it. And then I spent the rest of the day schmoozing around the Marvel offices. And as far as was concerned, that was it was fun, but it was it. It was, that story was just a complete throwaway lark.
No, you created Crossfire in that story though? That's your idea?
I did, yeah. That was actually based on my college roommate, Bill Cross. um, it was just a lark. And so then I went home. The week was up, and I went home, and I'd spent a few more days wandering around Marvel with Roger, and meeting people and such. But I went home, and I thought, okay, that's that. And then about, I don't know, 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, I get this check in the mail, and I get the check, and I look at the check, and I think, this isn't that much. It's a lot more than I'm making now. Maybe I shouldn't be quite so hasty on this. And then, so like the end of August, I moved to New York and started insinuating myself into the Marvel offices, and that was that.
You wrote a lot for them. You wrote a lot of stuff for them at that time.
Yeah, well, the thing is that in those days, they don't do this anymore as far as I know, but in those days, see, they'd spent the 70s, if you remember Marvel history, they'd spent the 70s on this writer-editor system that ended up with a lot of reprint issues to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
And when Jim Shooter took over, well, Marv had already started, when Marv was editor, he had already started trying to combat this by doing team-up stories that could fit into any number of magazines, like you do a Ms. Marvel and Spider-Man crossover that could fit into, you'd be shoved into either of their comics, any of their comics, given that Spider-Man had, I don't know, 3 at the time. And at the drop of a hat, if someone was late with their issue, or an Avengers story that guest starred the X-Men or whatever, but Jim had come in apparently. Now the legend about Jim is that he got the job by promising Stan that the trains would run on time, and so that was it. That all Marvel comics were supposed to have fill-in issues. And so I ended up being a fill-in issue guy. I was never really a regular writer up there. I was the fill-in issue guy. I was the guy that if they needed something in a hurry and they needed it, and it was basically, I realized very early on that if they asked you if you wanted to do something, you said yes, because if you said no, they stopped asking.
Okay. So
whatever they asked me to write, I would write. And whether I knew anything about it or not, I do the research and I do the story and I'd come up with something. And a lot of it was, I would not hold up a lot of it as great work. Let's put it that way. But I did do it. But it
was the fill-in work, right? So it's you do the Spider-Woman, Spider-Man, the first team up ever is you, right?
Well, no, that was actually, I was collaborating with Mark on that because Mark was the regular writer on the book. But Mark liked bouncing stuff off of people and liked having people bounce stuff off of him. And I got along with Mark, and I kind of connected because we were both from Wisconsin. I think he was from Appleton. And so we kind of became the Wisconsin Mafia is putting too fine a point on it. But, there have been lots of little groups over like Jim Starlin and Al Milgram, and I forget who else, Keith Pollard, I think, all came out of Detroit fandom, and we had no connection to each other in Wisconsin. We didn't know each other at all in Wisconsin, but I got there and it's like, yeah, and we lived close to each other. We didn't live far apart. Mark and I liked collaborating with each other, so I was co-writing those issues of the more co-plotting than co-writing. I think he was doing the dialogue, but co-plotting Spider-Woman with him at that point, and a few other things. We worked on a bunch of other things too. So that was kind of more of a partnership there than fill-ins. But
and then before we go, my partner joined us while we were talking. Okay. He's just gonna jump in here now.
Sure.
Unfortunately, he was late. No fault of his own.
No chair of his own either.
Hi, how are you? We're on a couch usually.
Yeah.
So
How are you, Mr. Grant?
Hi.
we were just talking about how he first got into comic books, and now we're talking more about Marvel. But now we get into what most people know you for. You created that Punisher limited series that
With Mike Zack.
really pushed that character. And I know everyone's probably asked you this question a million times. How did that come about?
Well, that's a funny story. That goes back to fandom. Actually, it goes back to CPL, like I was saying. One of the guys who used to do drawings and things for CPL was a guy named Duffy Voland, who ended up being a working the big wheel in the production department at Marvel. He unfortunately died very young, but he knew everybody. But I didn't know him. But when there was a convention in New York in the week between Christmas and New Year's in 1976, and when I told Bob Layton that I was going into to the convention, he said, he and several other people from CPL said, "Oh, well, you've got to stay with Duffy Voland." And it's like, I don't know Duffy Voland. That's all right. Duffy loves everyone. He'll love you. And which, I went and I called up Duffy and I said, "Hi, I'm coming." And he said, "Fine." Duffy lived way the hell out in the hinterlands of Brooklyn. I mean, like literally you got off the subway and you walked a mile through swampland with wild dogs roaming it to get to Duffy's apartment. I'm not exaggerating here. I'm not exaggerating at all. And so the convention was like 4 days and I was in there for a week before that. And Duffy said, "Okay, you can stay with me, but here's the rent. You have to pitch something to Marvel." And I'm going, "I don't want to pitch to Marvel." And he says, "Oh, you got to come up with something." And I said, "I don't know what I'd pitch." And he said, "Well, just find something that no one else is doing anything with, and then, come up with stories for it." So Duffy goes off to work one day, and I sit in his apartment typing. I seem to have been, and now that I look back, I did a lot of this back then. I came up with 3 pitches. One was for a Punisher because, okay, he was an action hero. I could deal with that. One was for the Black Knight, and I don't remember specifically what the third one was. It might have been for the Black Widow, but I don't know. And I don't really remember that one. That one I never did. The Black Knight I did, and the Punisher I did. But so I went in, and Marv Wolfman was the editor at the time, and editor-in-chief at the time, and it was like I said, it was the week between Christmas and New Year's, so he was the only one in the office. The office was closed, but he told Duffy I could come up and pitch to him, and Marv remembers nothing about this, by the way, which I wouldn't really expect him to, but I went in, and so I made my pitches, and Marv politely listened to them and said, "Well, yeah, we're doing things with all those characters, but thanks for coming in," was really what it was. And so I went, "Oh, okay," because, like I say, I wasn't really like looking to get work at Marvel right at that instant. And so, I told Duffy I'd gone in, and it was a fine meeting, and thanks, and, But the story that I came up with for the Punisher then, when I thought about it, I thought, I really like this story. I think I could really do something with this story. And so from the moment that I started working at Marvel, doing work with Marvel, I started pitching that to everyone I could pitch. And nobody wanted it. They were all going, "Oh my God. It's like the Punisher. Are you kidding me?" And this went on literally for years. So then I did a Marvel team up with Mike Zack, Shroud, and I got along with Mike really well on it. I didn't really have any direct dealings with Mike during that, but we worked together well, and I thought it came out really nicely.
That's the Mockingbird one, where you create Mockingbird?
No, this is the Shroud.
Okay.
The Shroud. And so Mike had then gone on to do Secret Wars and was a big deal in Secret Wars. And we were sitting, now my wife, by then, I met her at Marvel, and before she was my wife, of course. Mm-hmm. And by then she was still working there, and we were sitting around, and she said, "Hey, Mike's done with Secret Wars. You should call him up and ask him if he wants to do the Punisher." And I kind of looked at her weird, I'm just going to call him up. And she said, "Yeah, what do you got to lose? Call him up." So you can blame this on her. And so I called up Mike, and I said, "Hey, this is Stephen Grant. I don't know if you remember me." He said, "Yeah, I remember you. Yeah, fine. What?" I said, "Well, I was wondering if you wanted to pitch a Punisher miniseries with me." And there's dead silence on the end of the phone for a second. He says, "Well, John, his inker, John and I were just sitting here in his basement in Connecticut, talking about what we wanted to do next. And we were thinking, wow, it'd be really great to do the Punisher." Punisher. And it's so it was just this odd confluence that you almost never get. And then we talked about it, and it turned out we both had pretty much the exact same. He didn't have the story, but in terms of how to handle the character, we both had the exact same attitude toward how the Punisher should be. So then we started pitching that around, and at the time, Marvel had decided. Well, I don't know. Someone at Marvel had decided that they no longer had any competition in comics. They had to be from other comics companies. So they had to be competition for themselves. So the idea was that every editorial team should have its little stable of writers and artists, so that then that would be Marvel. Editorial departments would be competing, editorial offices would be competing against each other. And I think that what put us over was the fact that at that point, coming off of Secret Wars, Mike was the hottest property in Marvel that everybody wanted. Mm-hmm. And he wanted to do the Punisher, and Carl Potts said, "Yeah, I want to do the Punisher." Carl liked the Punisher too, but prior to that, you really couldn't get anywhere with the Punisher. It was Mike coming onto the book that sold the book in office. And even that was kind of iffy. And as the story that, this is another story I got that you'd have to ask someone else for verification. But the story that I got was that when Carl went in to pitch it to Jim Shooter, Jim looked at him oddly and just said, "Okay, but it's on your head." and that was, and then we started doing it. And prior to but it was in pretty much every important way, it's the exact same thing that I pitched to Marv 10 years earlier. Mm-hmm. So it was and it wasn't that I had people think I had this great interest in doing the Punisher, and it wasn't that I had any great interest in doing the Punisher, it's that I wanted to do that story, and the Punisher was the right vehicle for it.
Right.
And I got to say, I have looked at that more. People ask me who are my favorite characters, and this goes back to what you were saying. We were talking about fill-ins. It's I've never really approached it in terms of, wow, I really would love to do some people go, wow, I wanted to do Spider-Man all my life. It's it doesn't really matter to me whether I do Spider-Man. It matters to me if I've got a story idea that a character is a good vehicle for. Mm-hmm. I don't want to go again. I don't want to necessarily do things against the grain of the character. Going against the grain of the character is the wrong thing to do, but but if you've got stories that you can wrap around characters, that's always it's always better to find a character to fit a story than it is to find a story to fit a character.
Right.
From my point of view, so anyway, that's how that got, that's how the Punisher got started. Marvel had absolutely no faith in it whatsoever. And and I was told that that like the week before. Now, it was off the order sheets in at least one section of the country altogether. I know that, and not, the first issue. And the week before, someone from sales said, I think it was Carl that they said this to, you know, our readers are not going to be interested in the adventures of a homicidal psychopath. And well, this was relayed to me shortly thereafter, and I said, okay.
Yeah. Wow, were they off, huh?
I guess we'll find out. And then on books were released on Friday back then, and on Friday it came out on Friday morning and was sold out pretty much everywhere in the country by noon on Friday. And by Monday, Marvel had initiated its first, what do they call it now? You know, the restocking thing. The
second printing.
Yeah, whatever it was, you know, whatever that was the first time they introduced that, because the demand from retailers was so great.
Wow, that's crazy.
That's a great story that you had faith in it for 10 years, and look where the character is now.
I really wanted to do the story, and I think it's a very tough character to do properly. I mean, I think a lot of people misinterpret the Punisher, and I think he's a very difficult character to do properly. So, but you know, on the other hand, my view of properly is the way I do it. So, you know.
Right.
And you also create for Marvel. You create Mockingbird, right? In the Marvel team up.
Yeah.
And where does that character come from for you?
Well, we were just Mark and I were looking for a I always like doing female characters. I actually kind of prefer writing female characters in a lot of ways. I explained this to somebody at one point at Marvel that the thing about women and minority characters as opposed to white male characters is that white male characters are by and large required to fit into very narrow emotional parameters. Mm-hmm. Whereas if they're not white and they're not male, they can pretty much go all over the place and everyone will just excuse it. So
that's interesting.
So it's just there's more leeway with non-white, non-male characters, you know. People are just more accepting of flaws in those characters, in that type of character. You know, you don't have to be Superman.
Right. So you can create more of a rounded character using those archetypes.
Yeah, you can do more things with it. You know. Yeah. So we were looking for just something we thought, you know, let's introduce a character, because both Mark and I at that point were kind of hungry we were trying to figure out how to find our niches at Marvel. You know, I was always trying to get a regular book. I never did get one, but at least not till the 90s. But you know, so I was starting to try and make my own characters, and I had characters that I would run through different fill-ins and things like that. And we sat down. Now, Mark had this idea of doing a Marvel version of the Justice League.
Right.
He had a whole bunch of characters that he had already set for it, which was the like the Aquarian for Superman, the Shroud for Batman, Hawkeye for Green Arrow. Mm-hmm. I forget who else he had, but this was our attempt. Hello?
Yeah, we're still here.
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, you're shaking your head. I didn't.
No, he's telling me not to do something.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Okay. And so this was the Black Canary. This was the Black Canary from Marvel's Justice League, and that's where that came from. But I wanted to do a spy story. I had pitched one of the things that I had pitched and failed to pitch several times was Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D., which also goes back to that that hotel that convention in 1976 in a hotel room when I ended up after hours at the convention, where I ended up in a party with Steve Gerber, who I'd met for the first time, Tony Isabella, who I'd met for the first time, and we were talking. Gerber and I were talking about at that point, the House was investigating the CIA and all these supposed illicit activities of the CIA, and so Gerber and I were talking about, the Marvel Comics version of that, which would be, what are all these weird things Shield's up to? And Tony got very mad at us and insisted that Shield were the good guys and they would not do anything bad, which Gerber and we were like cocked our eyes at that. and that was one of the things that I was pitching, is Nick Fury versus Shield. And I couldn't get that off the ground, but this was like the Mockingbird story was my introductory chapter to that, which never went anywhere after that for various reasons. And so that was kind of both of us scratching an itch with Mockingbird. And so that's where Mockingbird came from. And and she was just supposed to be the idea was she wasn't really an action hero. She was just supposed to be a spy. But, Mark cooked up her costume, and, I came up with like the staff, the gimmick of the staff that she uses to fight with, and various other things, and put it together, and we ended up with Mockingbird. But the idea was she would be more of a spy character than an action character.
Right. It's a great character that's lasted for quite a long time.
Well, the funny thing was, really not a lot was done with her for years and years. She was a very abused character for years. And as a matter of fact, the reaction to that first issue, because I was also doing the letter pages for Marvel at the time, because I was trying to pick up money wherever I could. Mm-hmm. And the letters that we got on that issue, we got a lot of letters, and they were all really angry. And they were angry because we had introduced a new character in Marvel Team Up instead of featuring an existing character.
Oh, okay. Oh,
which just, boom. It's like, what the hell? And that was pretty much the only reaction she got was, why are you introducing new characters in Marvel Team Up? And so, she didn't really get much notice at Marvel at the time. And, and Mark, when he did his Hawkeye miniseries, brought her in specifically so he could have his own Green Arrow, Black Canary team up in Marvel, mm-hmm. and romance at Marvel. And which personally, if it had been left to me, I wouldn't have gone that way. But, she was always kind of built for that to start with. And then I think the next time she showed up, she was in West Coast Avengers, Englehart's West Coast Avengers, where she went through all kinds of weird hell. And, and I always thought she had huge potential as a character, and I'm finally glad to see her out and about, but it was a long slog. It was like 20, 30 years before anyone really did anything with her. So,
yeah. I'm a big West Coast Avengers fan, so that's why I've been a fan of hers for a long time, just because I love that series. It was to me, it was very different. So the character stands out to me. And you created one of the characters that really stands out to me. So.
Oh, thank you.
I have one more question about Marvel, and then we'll talk about some of the indie work. One of the reasons why we had you on is recently we were at a convention, and I picked this up. And we've been discussing about how this possibly came about and how you got. And this was a huge seller. This sold.
Oh, believe me, I know. Until X-Men 1, this was the best-selling comic Marvel ever published.
Wow, the best-selling comic Marvel. It was one of the best-selling. It was the best-selling comic of the 1980s, and the best-selling comic they've ever sold before that. So how did you get pulled into that?
Okay,
how did this even come about?
There was this guy named Gene Pelk, Pelc, who was some sort of sales rep for Marvel in Japan. And Gene was a very devout Catholic. and was in with the somehow was in with the Franciscans, and convinced Marvel to publish the life of Saint Francis, which preceded this book, which sold reasonably well. And then at some point, he was encouraged to pitch the life, to do a book about the Pope. And he had this idea that, he had this idea that he would be closely involved in it, which never happened. But they had set up the deal for the Pope. And the first I heard about this was right before a bunch of us used to go out to Ralph Macchio's house in New Jersey. His family owned a big mansion. And we'd go out on Friday afternoons in the summer and go swimming and have barbecues and things. And so I had heard about this in the morning before we left, that they were going to do a Pope book, and I laughed about it. I thought this was, I thought, oh my God. And so I assumed that Mary Jo Duffy, who had written the St. Francis book, was going to write it. And I saw her at Ralph. I talked to her at Ralph's, and I, kind of like was ribbing her about the Pope book. And she looks at me. She says, "I heard you were doing it." And he's like, "What?" And then Monday morning, I called into Jim Shooter's office. He says, "I want you to write the Pope book." And the reason that I was chosen to write, there were two reasons I was chosen to write the Pope book. I was raised Catholic, although I did not make a big issue of it at the time. I was no longer Catholic at that point, and which is probably a smart thing to keep quiet at the time. And I was expendable. I was not, see, Marvel always had it's like, their bread and butter books were what they wanted their most important talent on. Mm-hmm. Books like this and often the, licensed books and things like that, they shunted toward people that they thought were less commercially valuable. So basically, I ended up writing the Pope book because I was expendable.
And then it becomes one of their biggest selling books. So,
and like I say, when you're asked to do things, you don't say no. Mm-hmm. And I thought it would be an interesting challenge. Because I wasn't going out of I was trying to do a good job on the book. I wasn't trying to mock the Pope or anything. So then I did the research and I interviewed people. I got a lot of information from this Polish priest who was a childhood friend of the Pope's and was, I guess, well, not childhood friend, but friend since childhood of the Pope's. And so he gave us a lot of information, and then I wrote the Pope book.
Was it approved? Was it approved by the Vatican, or did you have to run it by anybody in the church before?
This was being done through the Franciscans, so it was approved by the Franciscans. Yeah.
No. It's a very interesting comic, and I remember when I was a kid, and we just saw it about 2 weeks ago, and I was like, this is so interesting that that this is something that was out there and was so popular.
Well, I ripped off the framework from Citizen Kane.
Who would have thought the Pope had so much in common with the Punisher?
Yeah, this gets brought up, believe me. I'll tell you a funny story about the Pope book. Dynamite Comics would not be here today if it wasn't for the Pope book.
Oh, really?
How's that?
Well, Nick Barucci, who owns Dynamite Comics, was a kid at the time, and his parents just hated comic books and would not let him, would give him all kinds of trouble if he tried buying comic books, and because they thought their comic books were bad. And then the Pope book came out, and he grabbed it and he showed it to his parents, and he said, "See, the comic books are good." And after that point, they let him buy comic books, and and Nick Perucci developed out of that. So I guess in a way I am directly responsible for Nick Perucci.
That's great. So I also wanted to ask you about Whisper, and originally it's supposed to be at Capitol Comics, right?
There was a comics, yeah.
And then they go out 2 issues there, right? And then they go out of business.
Yeah. Well, the reason they went out of business is not that their comic books weren't selling, because their comic books were selling pretty well. Mm-hmm. The reason they went out of business is that they were a comics distributor, and the companies they were distributing thought that them publishing their own comics was kind of unfair competition. And they were sort of given an ultimatum of either you stop publishing comics or we pull our books and we take our books elsewhere. And as much as they liked publishing comics, there was nowhere near as much money in it as distributing. Right. So they shut it, they said, hey, we can't publish any more of these. They won't let us. And that was why Capitol went out of business, is that they were kind of driven out of business by, which I can understand it from the other company's point of view.
And then bring it over to First? You bring Whisper to First?
Yeah, well, they actually made a deal to take the whole line to First.
Oh, okay.
So that's how they ended up at First. But that's why they ended up at First, is that so. But it actually had nothing to do with the sales. The response was pretty good. So
we have to ask this question because
sure.
Howard Chaykin is a friend of the show, and we interviewed Howard, and we love Howard. And how do you get to be the next person to write American Flag after he's not writing it anymore?
I was asked to.
By him?
By him, yeah. Howard said, I want you to write this. And, okay. It's like, again, people offer you work, you don't turn it down.
And this was after Punisher, right?
No, I think it was before Punisher. I'd have to look at the date, but I'm pretty sure it was before Punisher. It was after Whisper. Well, let's see, Punisher was 86, so yeah, this would have been 85, I think.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure he had discussed it with the guys at First. I'm not privy to who made what decision when, but they were obviously comfortable enough with me taking it over at that point. So which may or may not have been a good decision.
It's a great series.
Anyway.
Really, it's a great series. I don't think it gets talked about enough, to be honest with you.
Oh, American Flag, yeah, no, it's got a great place in history.
Oh, I know. No, it was. You could make a good case for it being the most pivotal series of the of the 80s, but
sorry, go ahead. We always like to talk about creators about it. It really makes it confuses us how options work. So you've had some of your work made into movies, and then you've had some of your work optioned and into dark horse, but never actually.
Well, Enemy was made into a pilot,
right?
So that actually got made. It just never got shown. Whisper was actually first had set up a deal with I forget, it was some independent production company that had some big, I think it was Teen Wolf they had the big success with. Okay. So they were, and he knew, the guy who ran that was Rick Obadiah, the publisher at First, his college roommate. So they had set up a deal to do a Whisper movie, which the more I didn't really have any control over it, and the more I heard about it, the less I wanted anything to do with it. They had decided to make it a cyberpunk thing set in future Los Angeles, and starring, I think it was some female Prince protege. I don't think it was
Was it
Vanity? Was it Vanity?
Okay.
And about this thing, I thought, this doesn't sound like even remotely like anything. So basically, they were just using the title, and
But you get paid that, right? When they option it to you, they give you.
Well, no money ever actually changed hands on that. an artist named Olivia did do a bunch of presentation pieces for it. I don't know if she got paid for anything, but so that was my personal experience with Hollywood, and so what do you want to know about how options work?
Because we've talked to a lot of creators, and we find it very interesting how when something gets optioned, they pay you when they option it. They may not do anything with it, and then you get it again. Like we've talked to creators who've had things optioned 3 or 4 times.
Oh yeah, no, I make a decent amount of change off options now and then. Mm-hmm. No, options are kind of a cheat. Because when people talk, excuse me a second. This is always a big laugh I get. This is always a big laugh I get when I see a press release from from somebody in comics saying, "Hey, our character's been optioned for $250,000 or whatever." It's like, well, yes and no. The $250,000 is what you're going to get when the movie starts filming. Mm-hmm. The most you're going to get up front is 10% of that.
Okay. And
these days, that's not even guaranteed. Some actual the options that you get paid can be as little as $500. They can promise you the moon when they make it. Sure. Because the amount of money that they pay is generally tied to the amount of money the film costs to make, the budget of the film. So the higher budget it is, the more money you're going to get up front. I mean, not up front, but when they start filming. But up front, they'll pay you as little as they can conceivably get away with because they don't want to spend money that they're not making.
Right.
So when people talk about how much their films have been optioned for, I always have to laugh because that's not what they're getting paid.
So you did really well on Two Guns then, because it's Denzel Washington and Mark Wahlberg,
Bill Paxton and
of course a Pretty Penny. So do you have any input in that when they make that Two Guns movie? Do you have any?
Oh no, not really. No, but I didn't really care. That Blake Masters, the guy who wrote it. I'm told that now they always ask you this when you go in, because I've been into for pitches and things too, and they always ask you this: is they've got this. You give them the script, but they say, "Well, how do you see this as a movie?" Because they don't want to actually read anything. They will just want you to talk to them. And Ross Ritchie told me that Blake Masters in that meeting just looked at them, held up the comic, and he says, "Well, this is how I see the movie." So I was pleased with that. At that point, I wasn't really too worried.
We've had Ross on the show too. Ross has been on our show. He's great.
Yeah. And so I felt in pretty good hands with that.
Do you get to go to the premiere? Like, are you involved?
We were on. My whole family went to the premiere. Yeah, I went on set for a day.
You hung out with Denzel and Mark Wahlberg, and
I didn't really no one hangs out with Denzel.
Yeah.
I talked with probably Bill Paxton more than anybody, but Mark Wahlberg, was very nice. They were all very nice. It's like hanging out a movie set isn't the thrill that most people think it is. It's a lot. I mean, it was kind of fascinating watching because they did like 18 retakes of the same scene, and, with Denzel and Mark. And the thing about Denzel is that he'll adapt things from scene to scene as he sees fit, So you never quite know what you're getting with him, and it all varies just a little bit. Mm-hmm. But that part was interesting to watch, but there was an awful lot of just standing around and shutting up, and twiddling your thumbs, and it was a hot desert day in New Mexico, and outback of New Mexico, and it was interesting, but it's not something I'd like to do on a daily basis.
I love the fact that you said you hung out with Bill Paxton, because he's definitely the person I would like to meet on that cast. He would have been
very chatty. He was very chatty.
Yeah.
And James Marston, I had a nice chat with.
Yeah.
And which, well, and it was very funny because when Ross would periodically call me up and say, "Hey, we've cast such and such," and I knew whenever he told me who they cast, I knew exactly the role they were playing.
Oh, that's great.
That's great.
Just so, with one exception, I got Denzel and Mark backwards.
Oh, okay.
But everybody else, as soon as he mentioned the actor, I knew exactly what role they were playing. So, and I love the film. I think the film is really good, and I would like it even if I had nothing to do with it. So,
yeah, it's enjoyable. You ever see it?
It's enjoyable.
Fun movie.
Yeah. I actually rewatch it about once every 18 months.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Keeps popping up all over there. It's still running on streaming all over. Place,
yeah.
So.
Mm-hmm. You got something you want to ask? You have something you want to ask?
No.
Oh, I'm sorry. What are you working on currently? You have anything coming?
Oh well. Yes and no. I'm working on things, but getting them out there is a major pain in the ass these days because it's all independent stuff.
Yeah.
And it's hard to nail down artists. And so at the moment I'm writing prose stuff here and there. I've had several things published lately. One thing I'm doing is I'm not sure when this is coming out, but this is done and should be coming out. Is I have a book coming out for Moonstone Press, which probably most people never heard of, Little Press. If you ever get the chance, get something I did for them a while back called Pat Novak for Hire, which is one of my favorite things that I've ever written. Which, are you familiar with Pat Novak for Hire?
No.
Okay. It was a 1948 radio show, and Moonstone started doing comics based on old radio shows that they had, I guess, the copyrights up on. I'm not sure, but at any rate, he asked me if I wanted to do this, and I kind of like, and Tom Mandrake drew it. And Tom did a fantastic job on it, but I would thought about he said, well, just listen to these radio shows and see if you like them. So, and I thought, I generally hate listening to old radio shows anyway. I just don't have the temperament for it. And if you like them, it's fine. I don't have a problem with it, but I don't have much use for them. So I listened to this thing, and this stuff is the most. It was like the Raymond Chandler style narration, the noir narration of the 40s. And this stuff had like the most tortured metaphors in it I've ever heard in my life. And I couldn't help it. I was like laughing through the thing. I could not figure out how anyone could do this. And so I call up Joe, who runs Moonstone, and I say, yeah, I'm interested in doing this, but only if I can, only under certain circumstances. I got conditions. He says, yeah. I said, I want to run this. I want to set it present day. He said, oh, okay, that's fine. Because it's, obviously it's set present day in 1948. I mean, the original shows were set present day for them. And I said, no, you don't understand. I want him to be the same character who was operating in 1948, but today. So he's a geriatric old man.
Oh.
And he narrates it first person. And I just went absolutely crazy with the similes, with the metaphors and the similes, and just tough guy narration. And intentionally just went as far over the top as I possibly could. And I think it's really one of the best things that I've ever written. It's just great. So if you can find it,
I will look for it.
I'll definitely look for it.
Yeah.
But
now I'm doing a book for him an original book for him called Bystander, which is actually something else I've been trying to get off the ground for years, which is just a crime comic. And I forget who's. I know the first name of the guy who drew it is Sergio, but I don't remember his last name. He's off the top of my head. Give me 1 second.
Mm-hmm.
Find it. Ibanez. Sergio Ibanez did a great job on it. But it's it's basically a simple crime story with a protagonist who has no role in the story. You know?
Oh, awesome.
And because I thought, can this be pulled off? Because I'm always, people are always right now I'm kind of interested in doing things that people always told me that you couldn't pull off, that you couldn't do. So I just want to do things people keep telling me I can't do. And so, but that's the next thing coming out, and I should be sometime mid-year. But I don't have any specific dates from Joe on it. You can call up Moonstone Press and ask him.
Okay.
So that's one thing I can guarantee he's doing. I had a sword and sorcery short story published in a book that Dan Brereton put together. Do I have it sitting here?
Excuse me.
I don't have it sitting here right offhand, but featuring a new character that he and I he co-created, and I forget what else. There's crap. I should have these things written down because I never remember names of anything anymore. Remembered bystander at this point. I have too many other things running around in my head to remember names.
Yeah.
But there are a couple of there's a couple of. Let me see if I can find them real quick. A couple of Kickstarter projects coming out, anthologies coming out. There was a Iron Maiden anthology out about a year ago that I had a story in.
Okay.
From, I don't remember the company, but you can look it up. I'm pretty sure they sold that on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
And what am I looking for here? And let's see. God, I can't remember the names of these things. I really do have to start writing these down. I've got every name except that here. Oh, Pots and Panels. There's a thing called Pots and Panels, which is recipes and short stories about food.
Oh, cool.
So,
that sounds awesome.
Interesting.
And I did a story about the zombie apocalypse, which if you look up their Kickstarter page, the name is Pots and Panels.
Okay.
All right.
If you look up the Kickstarter page, it either has it there or should have a link, and they actually published my story on the page as they come on for the book.
Yeah, we'll put it up. We'll put a link on.
We'll put a link on
on
this video
in the description. We'll put a link there, so anybody wants to get it can do that.
And then there was a original Whisper short story in an anthology of 80s and 90s independent comics characters that that the creators wrote prose stories about. So I did a Whisper story for that.
That's great.
Yeah, I can maybe find that for you in 2 seconds here if I.
That's awesome.
Right?
Character's still around.
Mm-hmm.
It's all those great first comic characters.
Yeah.
That people today.
Yeah, Nexus is in there, and I think there's
Badger.
I think I don't know if I think Badger is in there and Nexus isn't in there,
Badger just had, I love Badger. I love the stuff that Mike Barron did with them. He has a new series coming out, and if I tell you I can't find it anywhere.
Well, it's because of Diamond.
Well, yeah, there's all these little publishers.
Yeah.
Well, I don't have the name for the other thing, and I really should. I can't even remember the name.
You're keeping busy. You got a lot of stuff going on still.
Yeah, getting work isn't hard. Getting it out there is the difficult part.
Well, we see you just say yes to everything is what we're hearing. So.
Well, no, I don't. Actually, I'm very picky these days. I just.
Do you have any convention appearances coming up? You doing it?
No, actually, I'll be at San Diego, but I'm rarely am ever sitting still at San Diego.
Right.
I don't have any convention. I'm open for conventions, but I never, nobody ever calls me.
We go to New York because we're actually in New York. We're in Staten Island right now, so we go to New York every year.
Yeah, I'm in just outside Las Vegas, so that's kind of the wrong area for me. But yeah. I'm looking for conventions. I am supposed to be hearing about some, but I haven't heard anything specific about. They haven't called me back yet, but people have threatened to invite me to conventions. But when they happen, they happen. I mean, I'm not going to pay for me to go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't find this information now to save my soul, which is too bad because it's.
Well, you could always email us and find it later. We could add it to the descriptions.
Yeah, we'll throw it in the description for you.
Yeah.
That I can do.
Yeah, we will definitely do it. We'll put
you.
links to everything you have going on now. And listen, you have any questions? Brian?
No, I'm more of a compliment than a question. I really like your Get Carter poster.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah,
that's such a great and I think underrated movie.
Well, over on this side, I've got a Two Guns poster. So
nice.
I was wondering if there was one of those. Get Carter too. But listen, Mr. Grant, thank you so much for being on. This was really.
Oh, sure. Happy to anytime.
Yeah, and thank you.
If you ever want to come back on and promote anything at any time, you are more than.
If I hear anything out, I will take you up on that.
Yes,
please do.
Anything.
We would love to have you back on. I love listening to stories of, especially the old comic book days and how things are very different than they are now. And we've interviewed quite a few of the guys who worked for Marvel back then. We've interviewed Al Milgrom and we've interviewed Howard Chaykin, and we love listening to the stories.
We still got a few on our list that we want to get to.
Yeah, we get one every once in a while. Say yes.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for saying yes and for coming on. Really appreciate your time.
Stories.
Love the stories. Again, if you ever want to come back on, you're more than welcome. And I will send you a link to this once it's up. It'll probably be a couple of weeks. So
thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your time. Take care of yourself.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Take care. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.